Imagine waking up tomorrow morning. You pull back the curtains, expecting the usual grey drizzle of a British winter, but instead, the world has vanished. The roads are gone. The garden fences are buried. The silence is absolute, deafening. You turn on the tap to make tea, nothing. The pipes are solid, but outside, in that freezing darkness, life hasn't stopped. While you shiver in your kitchen, a milkman is already out there, driving a doorless refrigerator on wheels, battling to deliver bottles where the cream has frozen solid. This isn't Siberia. This is suburban Britain. To understand the sheer magnitude of 1963, we have to look at the timeline. It started innocently enough on Boxing Day, 1962. A belt of rain hit cold air over Scotland and turned into snow. But then, something catastrophic happened. The wind shifted. It came screaming in from Russia, a biting easterly wind that didn't just chill you, it hunted you. It hunted everyone, including the postman, often the only link to the outside world, who was forced to walk 10 miles a day through drifts where no van dared to go. By the morning of December 29th, Britain was locked in a freezer, and it stayed that way for 10 weeks. We aren't talking about a slushy morning commute. We are talking about snowdrifts 20 feet high in Devon, burying entire cottages. We are talking about the sea freezing off the coast of Kent. In some places, the ground froze to a depth of 2 feet, harder than concrete. The entire infrastructure of the country, pipes, rails, roads, was never designed for this. It should have collapsed, but it didn't. Why? Because on the roads, a bus driver was wrestling a 10-ton beast across a sheet of black ice with no power steering to save him. And on the lines, a railman was kneeling in the pitch black, fighting to thaw steel tracks with nothing but a naked flame. Today, if we get 2 inches of snow, the country grinds to a halt. Trains are cancelled because of the wrong type of snow. Schools close. The headlines scream chaos. We retreat to our central heated homes, turn up the thermostat, and wait for it to melt. But in 1963, the country did not stop. It couldn't afford to. The factories had to run. The hospitals had to stay open. The lights had to stay on. The gears of the nation had to keep turning. And the only lubricant available was the sweat and shivering labor of the working man. Men like the coalmen, wading through thigh-deep drifts with a 50-kilogram sack frozen to his bleeding back, just to ensure you didn't freeze to death in your sleep. They were the men who defeated the ice. And this is their story. Let's start with the most critical job of all, the coalman. In 2026, we argue about the cost of gas. In 1963, energy wasn't a switch on the wall. It was a physical weight. Central heating was a luxury for the rich. For 95% of the working class, if you didn't have coal, you didn't have heat, you didn't have hot water, you froze. It was that simple. Now picture the logistics. The streets are buried under 4 feet of snow. The coal lorry, a heavy rear-wheel drive Bedford or Austin with zero traction, can't get down the side streets. It spins its wheels on the main road. Does the coalman turn back? Does he clock off and say, health and safety? No. He parks the lorry on the main road, grabs his sack, and he walks. He heaves a 100-weight sack onto his back. That is 112 pounds, 50 kilograms. Think about that weight. That's the weight of a fully grown adult human. Now, imagine carrying that person on your back while wading through thigh-high snowdrifts, walking a quarter of a mile to Mrs. Jenkins's house at number 42. But here is the sensory detail that the history books miss: the wet sack. In minus 15 degrees, the moisture on the Hessian sack would freeze. As the coalman walked, the sack would literally freeze to the leather jerkin on his back. It became a solid block of ice, fused to his body. When he finally reached the coal bunker, he sometimes needed help to pry the sack off his own back. And his hands? You can't grip a heavy sack with thick mittens. You need purchase. So many of them worked with fingerless gloves or bare hands. The coal dust, gritty and sharp, would work its way into the cracks of their skin. The frost would seal it in. Common injuries weren't just bad backs. They were frostbite and cracked hacks, deep fissures in the skin caused by the cold and the grit. I want you to ask yourself right now, would you carry 50 kilograms on your back in -20 degrees for 10 hours a day, just so a stranger down the road could boil a kettle? Let me know in the comments. They were the life support system of the nation. If the coalmen stopped, Britain died. He was the difference between life and hypothermia. And he did it with a cigarette in his mouth and a flat cap on his head. While the coalmen kept the homes warm, the railwaymen fought a war against physics to keep the country moving. And this war had an interesting twist. It was the last stand of steam against diesel. By 1963, British Rail was trying to modernize. They were bringing in new diesel locomotives. But there was a problem. In -20 degrees, the diesel fuel began to wax. It turned into a thick sludge, clogging the engines. The modern trains simply died. So, who came to the rescue? The dinosaurs. The steam engines. Water and coal don't care about the cold as long as you have fire. The old steam giants were brought out of retirement to smash through the snowdrifts. But keeping them running required a level of brutality we can scarcely imagine. Metal contracts in the cold. Points, the moving parts of the track that allow trains to switch lines, would freeze solid. There were no automatic electric heaters back then. So, how did they fix it? Brute force and fire. Men were sent out in the dead of night, into the pitch black, armed with watering cans full of paraffin and gas torches. They literally had to set the railway on fire to make it work. Imagine the scene. It's 3 a.m. You are standing in the middle of a blizzard. You are kneeling in the snow, thawing a piece of steel with a naked flame, knowing that a 100-ton express train is due in 10 minutes. It wasn't just dangerous, it was desperate. The sheer noise of the wind meant you couldn't hear the train coming. You had to feel the vibration in the frozen ground. And for the drivers and firemen in the cab, it was a medical nightmare. Inside the cab, facing the firebox, it was 40 degrees Celsius, a blazing inferno. But behind them, the tender was open to the elements. The wind chill was -20. Front of the body, roasting. Back of the body, freezing. It was a recipe for pneumonia, bronchitis, and pleurisy. Yet, the trains ran. They were delayed, yes. They struggled, yes. But the network didn't collapse. Because men with shovels and paraffin cans stood on the lines and refused to let the ice win. We talk about transport, but let's talk about survival, food. In 1963, we didn't have global supply chains flying in avocados from Peru. We ate what we grew, and the ground was frozen solid. Farmers faced a nightmare. You couldn't pull vegetables out of the ground because the earth was as hard as iron. There are stories of farmers and agricultural laborers using pickaxes, literally mining for potatoes and parsnips in the frozen soil. Vegetable prices skyrocketed. The price of a cabbage went up by 300%. Families had to ration what they ate. And then there were the animals. On the high moors of Dartmoor and Wales, thousands of sheep were buried alive in snowdrifts. This is where the helicopters came in, but also the locals, ordinary men walking miles into the drifts with poles, poking the snow to find the air pockets where sheep were trapped, digging them out by hand and carrying them to safety. It wasn't about profit, it was about stewardship. You didn't leave a beast to die. Now, let's talk about the 4 a.m. shift. The milkman. The milkman is often seen as a comedy figure in British culture, but in 1963, he was a hero. Remember, there were no supermarkets open 24/7. You got your pint of Gold Top delivered to your doorstep. The milkman drove an electric float. No engine heat, no doors. He was basically driving a refrigerator inside a freezer. The wind cut straight through the open cabin. There was nowhere to hide. But the cold did something strange to the product. Have you ever seen a milk lolly. The temperature was so low that the milk would freeze inside the glass bottle. As the liquid expanded, it would push the cream straight up, popping the foil cap off. Housewives would open their front doors to find 2 inches of frozen cream standing tall out of the bottle, like a little white tower. The milkman had to navigate icy garden paths, treacherous steps, and frozen gates. One slip meant smashed glass and wasted earnings. There were no grippy Vibram soles on their boots, just leather soles that turned into ice skates on the pavement. But the milkman was more than a delivery driver. He was the social worker of the streets. In a time before mobile phones, if an elderly person didn't take their milk in, the milkman noticed, he was the one who knocked on the door. He was the one who found the pensioners suffering from hypothermia and called for help. In that winter, they saved countless lives just by paying attention. And finally, the men who moved the masses. The bus driver and his conductor. Driving a bus today is hard. Driving a bus in 1963 was a physical wrestling match. There was no power steering. To turn that massive steering wheel on a heavy, rear-wheel drive Routemaster required immense upper body strength. Now put that bus on a sheet of black ice. The driver wasn't just steering. He was fighting for control with every muscle in his arms, trying to keep 12 tons of metal from sliding into a ditch. The driver sat in a glass box. The heater, if it worked, was a wheezing little fan that did nothing against -20. The condensation would freeze on the inside of the windscreen. Drivers had to drive with one hand on the wheel and the other scraping ice off the glass just to see the road. And spare a thought for the clippy, the conductor, standing on that open rear platform for an 8-hour shift. The wind tunnel effect was brutal. They handled money all day. Have you ever held a copper coin that has been in -degree air for hours? It burns like fire. They suffered from chilblains, painful, itchy swelling on the skin, caused by poor circulation in the cold. Their fingers would turn blue, then red, then raw. But they kept smiling. They kept helping the elderly onto the bus. And there was a camaraderie we have lost. When a bus got stuck on a hill, the passengers didn't sit there and tweet about it. They got off. Men in suits, women in coats. They got out and they pushed. The conductor threw grit under the wheels, the driver revved the engine, and the people shoved. They were in it together. The big freeze of 1963 eventually thawed, but even the end was a disaster. As the ice melted, pipes that had cracked weeks ago began to spray water. Ceilings collapsed. Rivers burst their banks. The country flooded. But the memory of that winter stands as a monument to a specific type of British character that seems to be fading. These men, the coalmen, the railmen, the milkmen, the busmen, they didn't see themselves as heroes. They didn't go on social media to complain about the conditions. They didn't demand snow days. They put on their coats, they rubbed their hands together, and they went to work. They did it for their families. They did it for the wage packet. But they also did it for something else. Duty, a quiet, unwritten understanding that if they stopped, the community suffered. So they carried the weight. They fought the ice, and they won. We have better technology now. We have safer jobs. We have warmer homes. And that is a good thing. Nobody wants to go back to scraping ice off the inside of their bedroom window. But perhaps, in gaining all this comfort, we lost a little bit of that iron will. That ability to look at a frozen world and say, "Not today, mate. I've got a job to do." What do you think? Are we softer today, or are we just smarter? If you have a story from your parents or grandparents about the big freeze of '63, leave it in the comments below. Those stories deserve to be preserved before they are forgotten. If you enjoyed this tribute to the working men of the past, please subscribe to the channel. We are bringing their stories back to life, one video at a time. Thanks for watching, and stay warm.